Welcome in to another episode of the Outsider Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Drew Landry, and welcome in to another great episode for the top political podcast in all of Lubbock and West Texas. Today's topic deals with an issue that needs to be discussed about the issue over school vouchers, the issue over privatization, and the question being, is it over? Is that fight over? That's a big deal that we're going to get into today, and also going to talk a little bit about Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General, and going to have some ideas about perhaps some rumor mill about where a particular Texas state senator could be after this session. And so, with that in mind, let's get into it here. At a public education forum that was hosted on the campus of Texas Tech earlier in the month of September, the Texas State Senator Charles Perry, who he was part of the panel, informed the audience who was in attendance, and this was a live event, mind you, okay? This was a live event. And it was recorded live by Texas Tech Public Media, and it was put on their television station, the Lubbock affiliate of PBS. And he stated that it was as a matter of fact that in the upcoming legislative session that a school voucher program was going to happen. Okay, and he said that his role was essentially going to make the best deal possible. Now, there were other people on this panel, such as from Round Rock, State Representative James Tallarico. You also had a Texas Tech professor of sociology, and you also had the executive director for Pastors for Texas Children, named Charles Johnson, who's also the interim senior pastor at the Second Baptist Church in Lubbock. And so when he said that, Tallarico and when Perry said that, Tallarico and Johnson kind of looked at him and was just like, what? The rest of the crowd was also a bit interested in that, as to how that's going to happen. So, what else was interesting was that at the Texas Tribune Festival, again, during September, Panhandle State Representative was also on a panel dealing with public education. He was on there also with State Representative Gina Hinojosa. And he says there, State Representative Ken King, basically said that it was time for him to lower his sword and his banner against school vouchers. And he told the audience that was reported in the Lubbock AJ, the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, that the fight's over. He said, and this is a quote from the story, which is quoting King, that it's coming. It's coming. Prepare yourself for a voucher fight. The politics of the day have won this battle. King goes on to say that essentially his goal was to cut the best possible deal for public schools. I don't agree that we should give vouchers out with no accountability. That's really where it got hung up. Once the accountability measures were stripped out of the bill, there was nothing left for me to vote for. The votes are there. It's a fact. The fight's over. That's all from State Representative Ken King, whose district is large in a geographical manner, but it's mainly rural areas. His biggest city is Plainview. All right, just keep that in mind. His biggest city is Plainview, and he's got a lot of small cities and towns to make up the rest of the 194,000 that he has to get. So it's a very large district, mainly rural, and he's already thrown down his sword. He said, look, the fight's over. And so what Perry and King have essentially said here is that they've kind of given up. All right, really what they have said is that they see what's coming, and they aren't really going to fight it anymore. Then that's what school voucher advocates want. They want people to think that it's all over. Well, the truth of the matter is that those advocates won in the Republican primary. And what King and Perry are mistaking as to what happens in the Panhandle and for most of West Texas is that that's the same for the rest of the state. And what happens in this area, from the Panhandle really on down to the Conch Valley, is if you win the Republican primary, you really win it all. Now, there is something to say about how the Republican primary is essentially the election of consequence throughout a majority of the state. That I don't refute that. I don't think that's entirely wrong. But there are areas within the state that are more purple than red or more purple than blue. When we talk about the suburbs, those are going to be areas where the fight is now going to happen. And in those races in the Republican primary that happened back in March, and then in the May runoff, there were a few school voucher advocates that won. They won that day. And what Perry and King are saying here is that because it's the Republican who won, then that's essentially what's going to happen in November. Well, let's remember here, those districts changed in demographics, and the leadership did not because those Republicans were trusted by their constituents. Let's remember here, that's the same thing that happened to Democrats in the rural areas. When there was a new ability to get a different leader, those constituents showed that they changed. Okay? I mean, there was an eventual change. Like if we look for House District 76, and then later with that kept changing for former House Speaker Pete Laney, he was able to win every time, even though that area was voting for Republicans when it came to governor, when it came to lieutenant governor, when it came to senator. I mean, you get the idea. But whenever he left that seat, Joe Heflin takes that seat. He wins for 2 terms, and then that's the end of it. All right? Joe Heflin is the last Democrat to win in West Texas. And when I say West Texas, I don't mean El Paso. All right? That's a side note that I need to really talk about is Texas geography. That needs to be clear. Okay? When I say West Texas, I mean a little bit south of the Panhandle on down to the Conch Valley that leads down to McAllen. That's what we're talking about here. Okay, we're not talking about leading out to El Paso or around Loving or no. I mean, really from a little bit north of us, north of West Texas. I say us because I'm in Lubbock. A little bit north of Lubbock. You know, you probably can get a little bit north of Hale County, and then you go down far south. I mean, once you get south as Tom Green County, you might be in a new area there. But when I say West Texas, that's what I'm talking about. That's what everybody should be talking about. But I don't want to digress any more than what I have. So Heflin is the last Democrat to win in that area because the area changed. Same to be said about the suburbs and these areas where the Republican would always win. And even those areas where the incumbent didn't run, you're now going to have tight races. The Texas Tribune did a piece just about a month and a half ago about a district with Angie Chin Button. Angie Chin Button is a very tough person to defeat. Just ask my friend Brandy Chambers, who gave her the biggest run for her political life. But it seems like that there's going to be a very close race here again, and it's possible that seat could flip. That seat has been in the very much hot seat area for the last 4 or 5 elections. So let's understand that's also a possible one to flip. You've got one in the San Antonio area. You've got a few in the San Antonio area that could possibly go in the Democratic way. So to say that it's all over is a very bold charge when it comes to the school voucher fight. It's hard for me to say that it is before the election in November happens. It should be hard for any of us to say that it is before the election in November happens. Let's also know this. If Democrats aren't able to win 4 or 5 seats, I want to be clear, I'm not saying Democrats are going to take over the House. I don't think that's going to happen. But it is possible for Democrats to win 4 or 5 seats to where the 86-64 divide between Republicans and Democrats that exists in the House could possibly be, 81-69. Or you could see it 80-70. I think that is a possibility. I definitely think that's a possibility. And if that's the case, that's going to change the landscape for the speaker's race, which is of interest to really many. And that could also change the whole outlook on this school voucher issue. Okay? So I don't think this whole thing's over. I don't think that it is. Even if Democrats don't gain any seats. Okay? Say they lose 1 or 2. Let's play the other side. Let's play the other side what if game. Let's say that State Senator Perry and Representative King are correct, and that a voucher program is on the horizon. Well, what is the bill going to look like? Like, for real, what's it going to look like? You have people who want a full-on Arizona-style universal school voucher program, which that program, by the way, has blown a $1.3 billion hole in the Grand Canyon State's budget. Then you have what the governor has called for, what he called for in a 2023, and 2 special sessions about it, dealing with what's called an education savings account. Okay, he wants to expand that piloted program that was done during the coronavirus pandemic. And then you have what King and Perry are saying, is that let's just do whatever is there and just try to make it the best possible deal that we can have. Once you start to do things, once you start to see this thing emerge, then you'll actually see where people are going to land. King and Perry they both want some sort of accountability. I think that is what a lot of people are wanting. If you're going to privatize education and you're going to use public dollars for that, how can you not have public accountability? How can you not do that? How can you not hold them to the same standard? And look, I've written a lot about voucher programs. I have talked about this extensively, but it's worth noting here that the voucher program in the state of Texas, the voucher program movement in Texas, has suffered some pretty big problems in the last couple of weeks. I mean, we saw one of the big advocates for this in Vance Ginn openly admit on Twitter that he was wrong about his numbers, as he was shown that by State Representative Debbie Howard, that your calculations are incorrect. And then he says, yeah, you're right, I was wrong. But I'm still right on my arguments. Okay, all right, I'm sure. Then we have Corey DeAngelis, who had a former life known as Seth Rose, as he did things with movies and a variety of things that he did. You can Google all that. I'm not going to give any more conversations about that. But you make those 2 terrible errors, you should really be persona non grata in a lot of circles. And so those were very important people inside the school voucher program movement. And what's funny is that you're not hearing anybody on their side talk about any of those errors or talk about any of those problems that both of those gentlemen have come to light. So, interesting. But you still have other social media accounts who like to point out about problems within public schools. And look, as long as humans do human things, we are bound to be fallible. We're bound to error. It's going to happen. So let's get real. The other reason that I don't think this. Let's circle back here. Okay, let's circle back to let's come back to square one here. When we talk about the school voucher program, this is why I don't think that the fight is over. Because we don't know what the bill's going to look like. And even though all Republicans agree on this, I shouldn't say all, 95% of Republicans agree on this. That doesn't mean anything, because they also agreed on property tax relief in the 2023 session. They wholeheartedly agreed on this. Matter of fact, if you go back to when Republicans became the governing party in Texas in 2003, that means they had the governor. That means they had the Senate. That means they had the Texas House. They had the governing trifecta. Property taxes, without a shadow of a doubt, became a top priority for them. But the politics of property taxes is akin to playing the carnival game of whack-a-mole. Just when they think that they have it, there's another problem that emerges. And we don't have to look far in finding the problem here, because if we go back to the 88th legislative session, widespread support for property tax relief. What failed was agreeing on what that relief resembled. That was the problem. It took a regular session. It took one special session where the House, within about a few hours, gavelled in, passed their bill, and then gavelled out. And then you had that whole month of June where you had Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick jumping up and down going, "Come back, come back, come back." Didn't happen. And then as soon as that session ended, Governor Abbott called them right back into session to deal with property tax relief once again. And then they were finally able to deal with it. It took regular session, special session, second special session. And that's an issue that they all agree on. Now, who's the problem with that? Well, we know who the problem is with that. That's Governor Abbott. And Governor Abbott's going to pull the exact same thing on school vouchers. He's going to give some broad, sweeping statement about some support on school vouchers. I mean, we know how this game's going to work. I mean, I don't think I'm telling you anything that is a secret. I mean, we know Governor Abbott's playbook. Say something broad and tell them what you want, and then don't work with the legislatures to get it done. Don't work with any lawmakers. The worst kept secret in Austin is that Abbott doesn't work with lawmakers. Okay, that is well known. So that's going to be an interesting scene here, because with Abbott giving no direction, you're then conceding the power to then Lieutenant Governor Patrick and whoever his dancing partner is going to be in the House. I have a feeling that it's going to be Phelan. I think he's coming back for a third term, and I think you're going to see what the resolve of him really looks like. And those who opposed him, those 50 lawmakers who met at the barbecue place there at the county line in Austin, I think they're going to come in for a rude awakening if they're unsuccessful. Okay, that's the problem. And if you can't just wound your enemy, you have to take them out. And I don't know if any of those people in the 50 group have what it takes to take out their opponent in House Speaker Phelan. So that's the issue. Okay, it's going to come down to who is going to lead on it. And I think the Senate's going to have the budget in this next session. I think that's going to be the case. They take turns. The House does it one session, the Senate does it the other, so they alternate every single session. It's a pretty good way of doing it. Whereas some states, it's only the House. Okay. And so here we alternate chambers, and it'll be interesting to see which chamber will be doing the budget. I want to say it's the Senate this time. I could be wrong. I have a 50-50 guess. But it'll be interesting to see how much money that they're going to allocate under Patrick's leadership to a voucher program, and what kind of accountability that's going to be allowed with that. And I think that's going to be the sticking point. And I think once a lot of people get around the idea of accountability for private schools receiving public dollars, then the program's going to fade. So I don't think the fight's over. I think the fight is just beginning. What I have laid that out from all the discussion here, because Abbott doesn't work with the lawmakers. He leaves that to them. He'd rather do other things, whatever that they may be. But his inability to want to work with lawmakers has left this in the lurch. And everyone's looking around with their, they're in the trenches of the warfare that will become the lawmaking on this issue, and they look up for a breath of air for their leader, and he's somewhere else. And that's a problem. So I don't think the fight is over. The fight is about to begin. And on that second Tuesday in January of 2025, you best be sure the fight, we're in it for another round. Ding, ding. Just like Apollo Creed said to Rocky Balboa in that private fight at the end of Rocky III. Now, there is some rumor, there is some innuendo. That's all that I can say that it is. And it's been going around for some time, so it's not. I'm not saying if you're in that group of whisperers who hear this, you kind of shrugged your shoulders and go, yeah, that's been the thing for a while. But the rumor that's out there is that State Senator Perry is kind of tired of being a lawmaker. And so his name gets thrown around a lot in Lubbock politics. He's a CPA by trade. And so the rumor that gets out there is if Glenn Hagar is not going to run for controller in 26, then maybe Perry will do that. Okay? That's the rumor. That's all that it is. Who would come after Perry in the Senate? Well, there's other rumors about that. There's been rumors for that for some time. I mean, Perry, and I've got this on good authority, that he was very much concerned that former Lubbock Mayor Dan Pope was wanting to run against him. Dan Pope has given money to Senator Perry, so I don't, what kind of challenger donates to you? Well, I guess you can ask MJ Hagar about that too. Anyway, that said, that's the rumor that perhaps 2025 could be the last session that Senator Perry is running. That could be his last session. He gets asked this a lot. He's very coy. He's a smart politician. Okay, he's not going to show his hand unless he's ready to show his hand. So it's interesting though, because he got the 4-year term. All right, when they did the recasting of the die in the 2023 session, he got the 4-year term. So his time isn't coming up again until 26. And oddly enough, the same time when all the statewide officials are up for election. So you never say never. I mean, there's even some thought, you can put it out there, that he may want to maybe he wants to run for county judge. There's controversy with the Lubbock County judge because if you've been paying attention to any sort of statewide politics, there was a walkout within the Lubbock County commissioners. They didn't want to raise a tax, and so they wanted it to be at the no new revenue rate, and so they didn't show up for their meeting. Two of the four didn't show up, and so they didn't show up 3 times. So they had to adopt the no new revenue rate. And the sitting county judge, who's won election and re-election, I mean, he's shown his political prowess. All right, and he's a good politician. He can communicate really well. He's hit on some issues that people may not forget in Republican circles. There are those in the Republican circles out here who don't forget anything. And they don't want the government to do anything. And they are loud. They are also few, but they are loud. And when you get other people who are in those circles who constantly say the same thing over and over again. Of course, I guess I was just redundant, but when they just repeat the same thing, it's this mantra that the no new revenue rate is the only way, and this no new revenue rate, yada 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 yada. Then that's what they will believe. They don't want to hear any other sort of argument about anything else, and so it appears that perhaps Lubbock County Judge Curtis Parrish could be in some hot water. Now, that election is not for another 2 years. But people have to really remember that because the budget is annual, and so this has to come back to them. So there is talk. There's an idea that, I shouldn't say talk. Let me scratch that. There's an idea that perhaps that could be something that Senator Perry wants to do. But again, Perry the senator will not show his hand until he's ready to show his hand. And when he's asked this question, he's a good politician. He knows what to say. And so he would say like, well, I'm worried about this session first and I'll worry about things later, which is exactly what you should say. So that's the constant rumor mill that maybe 25 will be his last session. Maybe controller is something that he wants to run for. But Perry is a good fundraiser. He knows he's got very good contacts. So it's possible. And controller, while being statewide, it's also a down ballot race. So that is within his grasp if he wants to do it. Now, one other thing I want to talk to you about is Kim Paxton. He has been one of my favorite people to write about and one of my favorite people to talk about. This dude, man. Only he can do what he's done and still stay elected. Like how many more self-forced errors can one politician do and still hold that seat? He hasn't won once, twice, but 3 times stayed elected. And he'll probably want to run again. Of course, he wants, there's the rumor out there, there's the innuendo that he wants to challenge Cornyn in a 26. I say go for it. Please. I would love for you, Attorney General Paxton, to challenge John Cornyn. I would love to see that fight. So, but what happened here? Well, there was that saga about the State Fair of Texas being on private property. It's a nonprofit, saying you're not going to have, gun carriers. If you're a permit carrier, you can't openly carry. Well, he was like, "Yeah, we're going to go after you. I'm going to sue you." Well, that also meant for getting an opinion on that, and the one who wanted to do that was Lubbock State Representative Dustin Burrows, and Mays Middleton, I think, was also involved in that. They both asked the Attorney General for an opinion, which, oddly enough, he had to pull an opinion that he made about 10 years ago about this, saying that, yes, it is fine for nonprofits to have this sort of gun ban, which was exactly what the State Fair of Texas was doing following the first opinion. Now he says, no, you can't. No, I'm going to pull that opinion. This is the new one. Well, as reported from the Dallas Morning News and some other Texas media, he's been rejected in state courts. So he loses again. I mean, it's good for him to pull out these cases, but he just loses. Okay, he just loses, and it's so funny because this couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Couldn't happen to a better guy than Kim Paxton, right? My goodness. So, anyway, it's interesting to see how his career is going to really take shape. But this was all flash in the pan. It was all sizzle. Little steak, all sizzle, all flashes. That's all it was. There was one guy out here in this part of the world who gets upset that State Rep Burrows does this, but doesn't do it for the area. Well, again, Burrows is a measured politician. He's a lawyer. That was thrown in his face on a social media post. I saw it because someone showed it to me. And what he said was something exactly what you would imagine from a lawyer. Well, if this happens at the state level, this goes to the courts, it'll happen. It'll have a statewide effect. So I don't need to go after the South Plains Panhandle Fair that happens in Lubbock at the end of September, because it'll be statewide effect and everybody will be affected by it. Well, it turns out that doesn't matter because the Texas courts have said, nah, we're throwing this out, man. This is stupid. Really sucks for Kim Paxton. Now, one last thing I want to get to, and then this will be the last episode here. I'm sorry, last part of the episode. Is the Senate race between Colin Allred and Ted Cruz. Morning Consult did some polling of about, I don't know, maybe 1,600 people, likely voters. Had Allred ahead of Cruz by 1 point. The Texas Hispanic Foundation did another poll, had Cruz ahead of Allred by about 3 points. All of that tells me, and it should tell you that it's going to be a close race. That's it. It seems like that it's getting within the margin of error, and that means it's a statistical tie. Okay? Allred, for those on the left, he's received a lot of criticism, basically because of his campaign style. That he's not Beto, he's not Beto O'Rourke, he's not anything like him. I mean, even Cruz has criticized him. That Allred just stays in his basement. He's doing a Joe Biden campaign, and then he also says that Allred is an extreme leftist, and so how can you be an extreme leftist and yet campaign from your basement? I don't know. How does that work? But what makes this race so close? Is Allred really that good of a candidate? Is he better than O'Rourke? Is he just that good in general? Well, the thing is, and it's quite clear, at least it should be anyway, that this has little to nothing to do with Allred. It's all of his campaign strategy is all about him. Okay, it's about who his opponent is and who he needs to tackle. It's a neat little tip of the hat to Allred's NFL career as a linebacker. But this is all about Ted Cruz. Allred was at the Democratic National Convention, and he says, he said that Ted Cruz is a me guy. Yeah, he is. And this whole race is about him. I was on local media not too long ago on the only Sunday talk show in the city of Lubbock, which that's a whole other conversation for another time as well. And my good friend Jen Phillips wanted to talk about that race, and I said, great. And I mentioned that this is all about Ted Cruz because Ted Cruz makes this race close. All right. If Allred was running against John Cornyn, I mean, Cornyn would be up by 8 or 9 points consistently, and that would be the average, and we could write it off, and Cornyn's going to go back to Washington. But Cruz is not John Cornyn. Okay? He's not statesman-like Cornyn. And yes, Democrats don't like to hear that. And I get it. But you know that the personality between Ted Cruz and John Cornyn is like night and day. Just like the personality between Beto O'Rourke and Colin Allred are like night and day. Allred is a very disciplined candidate. He knows what to say. I think Allred also has learned that maybe Texas is not a retail politics state, at least statewide. I think he's also realized that the party in and of itself is not really equipped to run statewide. And I'm not the only one who has that opinion. I'm not the only one who's thinking that, who has thought that. So, lots of people have that thought too on the Democratic side. But that said, Ted Cruz makes this the close race that it is. He does it all on his own. He does it just by having his name on the ballot. Okay? Ted Cruz doesn't even have to campaign, and it's going to be a close race. I mean, they gave him he came in on that giant wave of Tea Party support in 2012 as he defeated Paul Sadler, and then we got to see the real Ted Cruz in that first term, where he was all about reading Green Eggs and Ham, and called Mitch McConnell a liar, and he tried to get rid of Obamacare so many times. He shut down the government. I mean, he was all about himself. Okay? While a lot of really what he did in his first term, all the effectiveness that he did was grow a beard. I mean, at least he doesn't look like Grandpa Munster anymore, you know what I'm saying? I mean, come on. At least that happened for him. Oh, and he started a podcast too. So, which he takes in iHeartRadio is giving him money for that, which he says is volunteers for, but how do you get money when you volunteer for stuff? I don't know how that works, but maybe I should ask Senator Cruz. It's interesting though, because Cruz, it's his personality. It's his whole demeanor. It's just him, going to Cancun, just being an outright jerk face rubs people the wrong way. And again, I'm not saying anything that nobody doesn't already know. This is all apparent. I'm just pointing it out to you. Cruz is just not a good dude. He's just not cool. He's just not anything. He's just so it's like what Jerry Patterson once said, is that he voted for him and then he had to go vomit. But Cruz is trying to rebrand himself. That's why he's on the cover of Texas Monthly. That's why he's doing this whole bipartisanship thing. Well, I worked so hard with Henry Cuellar, and I'm working so hard with other people, Ben Ray Lujan and Ralph Warnock and all these other Democrats. We're working really hard together. And, even though he voted against funding for Ports to Plains, which is a big deal in West Texas, because there's only one interstate highway in Texas that goes north-south. And we could really expand I-27. And it's a running joke in Lubbock that I-27 it's the only interstate that goes from Amarillo to Lubbock. So it's really funny. But, he's really doing the best he can to re-image himself. Like, wanted to re-image the Alamo, re-imaging Cruz. He's doing the best that he can to do that. But that's on him. That's a him thing. I mean, his handling of the Kate Cox question about what she had to do to get an abortion to save her life. Just all of these weird things that he's done just rubs people the wrong way. And so that's really the main point, is that Ted Cruz doesn't have to do anything to make this close race. To make this a close race. Colin Allred doesn't have to do anything to make this a close race. It is by design. And what's going to really decide the factor here is the Panhandle down to the Conch Valley. How many of those people are going to show up to vote? And are they going to vote just for Trump? Just for Harris? Are they going to split their ticket and vote for Cruz too? I don't recall. I haven't seen Cruz come out west of I-35 yet. I haven't seen him do that. If some of you know that if he has, just let me know. But that's the deal with O'Rourke. O'Rourke forced Cruz to come to West Texas and stand in a cotton field. Allred's not making him do that. And that's giving Cruz a false sense of security. Because I have a feeling this is going to be decided by maybe 10, 20, 30,000 votes. And, Jeremy Wallace from the Houston Chronicle has said that, about 2.9 million more voters have registered to vote since 2018, since he beat O'Rourke in 2018. The key for Allred is to get those newly registered voters out to vote and to vote for him. Because, there's this myth out there that more people vote than they'll vote for Democrats. That there's no political science to suggest that. I just want that to be clear. That's going to make some people mad, I know, and I don't care. Facts are facts, and that's just the way that they are. That goes for the right and the left. Should more people vote? Yes, absolutely. Are Republicans making it harder for people to vote in Texas? Yes, absolutely. Does more people voting mean a victory for Democrats? No, it doesn't. There's no causal relationship between the two. All right? 2004 is a great example where we had a very high turnout, and Bush got the most votes than anybody at that point, and he won. Bush won. 76 was a low voter turnout, and Jimmy Carter won. Jimmy Carter being the Democrat. Those are just a couple of examples. There's more that I can point to. But that's going to be the challenge for Allred, is he knows it's going to be close. He's got to get his supporters out there, and he's got to get more independents on his side. I mean, Cruz will lose the independent vote. There's no doubt about it. But how many of them are going to show up and vote for Allred? That's going to be the question. Okay. That's all from me. Appreciate you listening into the podcast. If you have any thoughts or comments, let me know. You can always find me on X or Twitter at Drew L. Landry. You can also find me on Blue Sky, which is a fun new social media. You can find me on Threads. And you can find me on Instagram, which is also fun as well, where you get to see many pictures and stories of me and cats and a lot of really dry jokes. Okay. Subscribe if you're not. Share with a friend. Love to get this podcast out. 1, more often, and 2, so that more people can listen and I can hear more of your ideas about how to improve or your thoughts about the content. I'm always wanting more conversations. All right. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again very soon.